Merci bien. Merci et ravi d'être ici pour essayer de clôturer. So maybe I'll do it in English so that most people can try to listen to me. And what I will do is try to actually bring a little bit of new thoughts that may actually reiterate or highlight some of the stuff that's been talked about. So what I've been talking about was basically about ethics, and we're going to try to talk about ethics within the domain of cyberspace. We've known that this domain has been much talked about, especially it was mentioned the different titles and papers. The World Economic Forum stated that more than 90 papers had been published already back in 2021 about ethics in cyberspace and ethics in AI. With lots of different institutions like UNESCO, like the US Department of Defense, like the European Union. But at the end of the day, what are we really talking about? What is ethics? Why do we need to talk about it today? What does ethics recommend in terms of relationship we have with others? And then what's the future of these whole conversations about ethics? So first, if I start to talk about what is ethics, which is something that we talked about for the last 1 hour, without perhaps much of a definition. Of course, it comes from the Greek term of ethos, which means way of life. And basically, it begs the question of what is the right or wrong decision that you can take. And there are many ways to think about that. They can be sources based on norms, on so-called natural laws, what is called prescriptive terms, do this or don't do this. For example, Immanuel Kant will tell us that lying is always bad, okay, so just don't lie. Or another way to think about it is to try to understand the consequences of what you do. For example, is it bad to lie to the police if you are actually hiding a Tutsi child to these police forces, and those police forces happen to be Intiwame, Hutu militia, and you are in 1994 Rwanda? Okay, so even the question of lying is not that clear. Then, of course, it begs also a question of what is right when we talk about the right decision. Of course, if we talk about the right or wrong decision, it means what you should do and also what you shall not do. It's about rules, it's about politics, it's even about international politics and war and peace. Something that we should talk about since we're dealing with CyberPeace. And that's an important point today. To the difference of most of wars since the dawn of times, in the last 100 years, many conflicts and geopolitical confrontation have been driven by stark difference in ethical values. And this is something new in the history of mankind. May have been fascist societies against the free world, communism versus capitalism during the Cold War, jihadism versus secular tolerance, or even today, authoritarian states against liberal democracies. And of course, this has impacts in how we think, what we own, and how we wage wars. So yeah, ethics is extremely important for all of those reasons. And it's even more important today as we are entering a new age of mankind, the age of cyberspace. And so we need to think about ethics in cyberspace, ideally to achieve CyberPeace we just talked about. So 3 thoughts on that. First, we need to think about the relationship between human and machines. Second, we need to think about the relationships between humans to humans in that world of machines. And then let's have some consideration about the future of all of that. So if we deal about the relationship between human and machine, there's an important question, especially if we deal with AI, which is who commands who? And I'd say that to me it's an easy one. Hegel used to talk about the dialectic of master and slave, and I like to talk about the dialectic of users and machines. And in this dialectic, machines must serve users. Otherwise, they are not machines, they're not serving their purpose, they are malfunction or accident. And technically that means that you need to have at least kill switch, the ability to stop the machine if it contradicts the will of the users. Otherwise, it's going to be an accident. And thus, as would say the US Department of Defense, you need to have systems that are governable and also that needs to be reliable. And also it includes cybersecurity, because cybersecurity in some ways is the ability to avoid that the machine contradicts the will of the users, not because of a problem, but because of an external malicious agent. And that's the whole issue of criticality of ethics in cybersecurity. A key point here, and I really want to stress that, is the importance of the human agency as part of that dilemma. And that was actually pointed out by two researchers, Avi Goldfarb and John Lindsay, in a 2021 paper that showed that in what we call in cybersecurity the OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, act, there is a place for judgment, which is orient. And this cannot be fully automatized because you have way too much dimensions to take into account there. And in a way, AI is asking more of us to get better judgment, to augment ourselves, and in some ways to know better what we really want. That's first point. Second point, as we mentioned, is the relationship between humans and how this is being mediated by all these digital machines. So the key element which had actually been talked about is the element of impacts, what all that has impacts on our human life. The way to approach that is to use science because you need to search for the truth. If you can't be rigorous to finding the truth, you will not understand what is impact, and the best tool that you have is still the scientific method. The second thing is not to reinvent the wheel and to reuse lots of international laws that already exist. And we've seen that, for example, with the United Nations, a group of governmental experts that tried to incorporate the law of conflict to incorporate that into our AI system, the law of armed conflicts, and it's still an ongoing work. But the final thing is to try to understand how you can actually calculate those impacts. And here we go back to ethics and large philosophers. We can go back to utilitarian philosophers, which are going to say the way you understand that is to maximize the greater good for the greatest number. Or you can go to the way of Karl Popper and try to think not minimizing the greater good, but minimizing the pain for most of people. And that's actually what you see already in impact investments. Companies like Bridgespan are going to identify the projects that are going to minimize the loss of people. The horizon that you can use for that, I would go back to Baruch Spinoza and the ethics, which show the two ways to understand the world, either subspecies durationis, you look at the small corner of your world, and you are going to miss out on lots of things, or you are going to look at the world subspecies aeternitatis, all across the world and across the span of time. And that's probably the right way to do that. At least that's what Baruch Spinoza would propose. So you have the tools in the last 2 minutes. Two implications that we have not talked about in terms of CyberPeace. First, digital ethics as an expression of societies, as it is going to be incorporated with lots of our tools and products, will have geopolitical implication. I'll give you one example. If today you go online on Bing from Microsoft or Perplexity AI, and you ask, is there a genocide with Uyghurs in China? They will give clear answers. If you ask that to generative AI from China, you will not get the same answers. And if we go, as we heard, on the route of certifying some services because we need to be ethical, then maybe there's a lot of products that, for example, would come from China that we will not be able to sell in the Western markets. And that, of course, will increase the geopolitical risk. that's something that we need to consider, and that's perhaps a risk that we need to take. A last point, and I go back to all the calculation of ethical calculations, how do we do that? Because it's super complex to try to understand the impacts of things across the world and across the span of time. And here, and I'll end up on that, we may have a fantastic solution thanks to AI. So I don't want to go into too much of tech solutionism, but I could imagine what I would call Spinoza machines, systems that will calculate, using AI, what could be all the implications of all that we do as corporations or even individuals, and try to see then if we're doing the right thing or the bad things. Of course, again, it needs to, in phases, human agency, so it could be there only but for helping and advising. But if ethics is an important thing, then we will need this type of tools to calculate that, the same way that we already have ethical principles and tools embedded in some products, such as, for example, risk pitcher. And if indeed it becomes a very important thing, then it will be an industry per se, as cybersecurity, which was very small and very nimble 15 years ago, now is becoming a 150 billion euros industry. And to end on that, maybe if we develop that industry, perhaps the people in the country which are on the other side of our ethical divide will be forced to also develop their own machines, and hopefully it may converge, or it may not. And again, we must be clear-eyed about that situation, that ethics is necessary. It may be a pillar, a technological pillar, in the confrontation, the geopolitical confrontation that we already see. We may need to invest. It may be a way to bring people together, but we may also need to sustain and defend it, because it may be also one key element in the upcoming, ongoing geopolitical confrontation that we already see. And that's my point. Thank you.